She said, y'all ain't gonna let me see my grandkids. Y'all ain't gonna see none of this money when I die. Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. My name is Janae, if you didn't know, and today's video is another true crime episode. So if you're ready, let's go. Alright y'all, so nail check right quick. I told y'all in the last video where I showed y'all my nails that they was gonna pop off, and they did. And these I don't like. Now the shape though, I really like the shape. Color and style, not so much. But you know, it's trial and error over here, so we just gonna go with it until it ain't going no more. What else? We're drinking orange juice out of a wine glass today. And yeah, outside of that, today's case is a mess. And let's just go ahead and jump right into today's case. So today we are with the Colegrove family, and they live in Laceyville, Pennsylvania. And Laceyville, from the research that I did, is like a really small place. It's considered a small borough, with the population being roughly 363 in 2020. And I was a little skeptical about saying that number, because how can a place really be that small? I don't know. But when I looked it up, that's what it said. And when a population that small, I just don't see how everybody not cousins. They might be, but that's neither here nor there. But this place is definitely a place where everybody know everybody and everybody know everybody business. And as far as the Colegroves are concerned, they seem to be a pretty well-rounded family. And the family consists of the dad, Joseph, or Joe, who owns the local barbershop. And it's a barbershop that has been in this town for quite a while. Joe opened this barbershop in the 60s. And so Joe's barbershop is a staple in Laceyville. And then you have the mom, Marlene, who's a school bus driver. And she's said to be a very tell it like it is type of person with a very strong personality, but she absolutely loves children. And Joe and Marlene have 3 sons. The oldest, who is Michael, he's 36 years old. And at around the time that this case takes place, he had recently developed a heart condition that caused him to move back home with his parents. And then there's the middle son, 34-year-old Robert, who is married with 2 kids. His wife's name is Heather, and they have 2 little boys, Patrick and Andrew, and they live next door to Robert's parents, Joe and Marlene. Finally, you have the last son, who is 31-year-old Stephen. And Stephen is the only one who does not currently live in Laceyville. He actually lives in Deposit, New York, which is about an hour and a half away from Laceyville, but he lives there because it is closer to his chemo treatments, because he had recently been diagnosed with colon cancer and unfortunately had to leave his job as a member of the Air Force. But aside from the 2 boys' health problems, everything in the Colegrove family was good. Now there would be the occasional headbutt between Heather and Marlene, because it said that Heather had a very strong personality as well, which makes sense because a lot of the times men choose wives who resemble their mother in some type of way. But with the 2 of them having the strong personalities that they did have, there was the occasional like back and forth, and the fact that they lived right next door to one another probably didn't make it no better. But other than that, everything was good. However, when Robert and Heather decided to adopt a little girl named Brianna, stuff would start to go left. Because while you would think that the addition of a grandchild would be good news, Marlene was not here for it. Marlene wasn't happy about them adopting Brianna at all. And the reason why she wasn't happy was not because she didn't like Brianna. It was because her and Joe were already financially supporting Robert and Heather. I told y'all that the 2 of them lived next door to Joe and Marlene, but what I didn't tell y'all was that they was living rent-free in a house that Joe and Marlene owned. And so Marlene just felt like, how y'all gonna have another kid when y'all aren't even paying for the kids that y'all do got, for real, for real. And I told y'all, Marlene was not the type to hold her tongue. She was a let you know how it is type of person. And she let it be known that she was not here for this adoption at all. She would do stuff like take the kids for ice cream, but just the boys, or just buy the boys' toys. She pretty much just left Brianna out of anything that had to do with her grandkids. And Heather, being the strong personality that she was as well, let it be known that she was not about to take that from Marlene. And Heather was pretty much just like, okay, so either you treat Brianna like you treat the rest of them, or you ain't gonna be seeing none of them at all. But Marlene wasn't trying to hear what Heather was talking about at all. And so she pretty much kept up with her shenanigans And as a result, Robert and Heather ended up moving out of the house next door and into somewhere else. I don't know where they went, but they left that house. They still lived in Laceyville, but they now no longer lived rent-free next door to his parents. And Marlene was pissed. She was mad because Heather really took her grandbabies away from her and Robbie let her do it. So Marlene was pissed at Heather and Robbie. Marlene was so mad that she ended up writing Robbie and Heather out of her will completely. She said, y'all ain't gonna let me see my grandkids. Y'all ain't gonna see none of this money when I die. And being the type of person that Marlene was, she wasn't about to take this lying down. She wasn't just gonna not see her grandsons. So what she would do was when the boys would have like little league baseball games and just any type of sports activity at a park or anything like that, Marlene would show up to the game. And her son Michael was the referee, I believe, for one of the kids' baseball games. This is the oldest son now, remember? And so she would show up at the games and Heather would kind of try to check her. But Marlene is not about to let Heather check her. So there will be all out arguments, and I don't mean little ones, at these kids' baseball games to the point where Mike would have to kick Heather and Marlene out of the park because they was going at it so bad. And one of these arguments got so bad that Michael ended up he started to fear for his parents' lives because Heather was a firecracker. She was very ill-tempered, and Marlene was even heard saying one time that if something happened to her, it was them. They did it. And so because of this big feud that was going on, Michael ended up purchasing a gun to protect his parents. Because even though it was mostly Marlene and Heather who was in the feud, Robert was staying by his wife's side and Joe was staying by his wife's side. So it was essentially mother and father against son and daughter-in-law. And again, stuff got so bad that Stephen had to come from New York to Laceyville to try to make amends within the family. However, that did not work and things would only go from bad to worse. So on the night of August 7th, 2007 into the morning of the 8th, it had stormed really bad in Laceyville, but it didn't storm to the point where shops should be closing the next day. So on the morning of the 8th, when Joe didn't open his barber shop, it was kind of weird, but the people of Laceyville didn't think too much of it because everybody's entitled to a sick day, right? But when Marlene didn't show up for a meeting that she had planned with a friend, they knew that something was wrong because Marlene wouldn't miss this meeting, especially not without telling the person who she's meeting that she won't be able to make it. And so this friend goes over to the Colegrove house, and when there was no answer at the door, she decided that she was gonna call her dad because she felt like something was just off. And so she called her dad, and when her dad came over, he made his way into the house, and at first everything seemed fine. Everything was in its place, nothing out of the ordinary. But once he made his way upstairs, he came across the dead body of one of the Colegroves. And it is then that he promptly exited the house and called the police. So once the detectives got there, they not only found one body, but they found three. And these three victims were identified as Joe, Marlene, and their oldest son, Michael. And they had all been shot to death. And upon initial investigation, it would appear as though this was a robbery because the phone lines had been cut and there was glass that indicated that that was the point of entry. Like they broke the glass out of one of the doors and then reached their arm in and, gained entry into the house that way. But nothing in the house of value was taken. So they started looking harder at this crime scene and noticed that the glass from the door where I said that it looked like that's where they gained entry, all the glass was on the outside of the door, meaning that it was broken from the inside. So they concluded that this was actually a staged crime scene. There was no robbery. It was just, this was a targeted attack. And so the detectives finished processing the scene, and in the process, they collected 6 shotgun shells. And so now they want to talk to the neighbors, see if anybody heard anything, see if anybody saw anything. And as they're talking to neighbors, one of the neighbors of the Colegroves said that even if they had heard a gunshot, they wouldn't have recognized it as such because of the storm. They said that the storm was so loud that they wouldn't have been able to hear the gunshot. And so they was pretty much no help. However, another neighbor did say that she had went to work early that morning. Like, I think it was a bakery. She had to be there at like 4 o'clock in the morning. And while she was at this bakery, she saw a light colored pickup truck speed by. And she thought it was a little bit weird that this pickup truck would be, one, flying down the road that fast in this particular area, and two, that this person in this pickup truck would even be out at this time of the day. But that was it though. Other than seeing the light colored pickup truck, there was pretty much nothing else. However, as the investigation went on and the police were talking to more and more people, everybody seemed to bring up the feud between Robbie and Heather and Marlene. And so naturally, Robert and Heather are now top suspects, and they did have the motive of revenge. So detectives decide that they want to see how Robert will react when they tell him that his parents and his oldest brother have been found murdered in their home. And once they get to Robert and Heather's house, they notice that there's a light colored pickup truck in the driveway that appears to have been freshly cleaned, not only on the outside, but on the inside as well. And remember that one witness said that she saw a light colored pickup truck speeding by, so they keep this in the back of their brains while they go deliver the news of the Colegrove's passing to Robert. And when they tell Robert that his mom, his dad, and his older brother are victims of a homicide, Robert don't give too much of a reaction. He pretty much just say okay and sits there. And so this reaction, coupled with the car outside, coupled with the family feud, detectives know that they have their suspect. But they do have to follow protocol, even though they feel very strongly that this is their guy. So they ask him, do you have an alibi? Where was you and Heather at last night? And Heather tells the detectives that she and Robert was at home all night together. So essentially, their alibi was each other. So obviously detectives don't believe this, and they kick it up a notch and ask Robert, is he willing to take a polygraph test? And surprisingly, Robert agrees. He goes down to the police station and he hooked up to the polygraph test. And during this polygraph test, he admitted that he and his family didn't have the best relationship, but he does deny having anything to do with their murders. And the lie detector test determined that it was inconclusive. His polygraph came back inconclusive, and so they didn't. But unlike her husband, Heather tries to downplay the relationship between her and her in-laws. She said that Joe and Marlene were very loving parents and grandparents who she loved dearly. And detectives is like, now you know that everybody know all y'all business. Why is you lying to me? But essentially, they didn't have enough evidence against them to hold them. And so Heather and Robert were released. However, they did end up seizing all of Robert's guns to test them for ballistics. And so while they was waiting for the ballistics testing to come back, Stephen was in town preparing for his parents and his brother's funerals. And so detectives wanted to talk to Stephen. And during his questioning, he pretty much pointed the finger at Robert and Heather as well. But once again, the detectives did want to cover all their bases, so they asked Stephen where he was at the night of the murders. And he said that he was back in Deposit, New York, where he was living with a friend named Robert Reinierson and his wife. And while Stephen isn't here being questioned, one of the detectives has a kind of like a realization that if anybody were to fire a shotgun, there would generally be bruising in the shoulder area from the blast of the shotgun. And so once again, just to cover all bases, this detective asked Stephen to take off his shirt just to see if he could see any bruising. And so Stephen obliged. He didn't take off his shirt, but he did lift down his shirt to, show his shoulder area. And first he lifted down the left side and there was no bruising there. And so the detective asked him to lift down the right side. But before he did that, Stephen let the detective know that he did shoot left-handed. So if any bruising was to be anywhere, it would be on his left shoulder because he shoots left-handed. But he then proceeded to let down the right side of his shirt where there was, in fact, a bruise on his right shoulder. And so the detective was like, what's that? But Stephen did have an answer. He said that he tripped up the stairs and ended up jamming his shoulder into like a railing or something like that. And I did not find this implausible because I fall up the stairs quite often, so I know that that's possible. And the detectives felt that this was plausible as well. And so they let him go. But just to be sure, detectives doubled back with Robert because detectives knew that Robert and Stephen would have shot guns together at some point in their lives. I mean, they're brothers, right? So they asked Robert, hey, do Stephen shoot right or left-handed? And Robert says that Stephen shoots right-handed. But the detectives are kind of like, why would Stephen lie? He don't have no motive to kill his parents. He didn't have beef with his parents, and he lives an hour and a half away. Like, it just wasn't making sense. And they didn't know what the hell. But what they did know was that somebody was lying. One of the brothers was a liar. So the ballistics test finally comes back for Robert's guns, and none of his guns are matched to any of the 6 shell casings that was found at the crime scene. And so now the detectives are squinting their eyes at baby brother Stephen. So what they ended up doing was driving to Deposit, New York, and going to the Rynearson household. So once they get to the Rynearson's house, the Rynearsons really had nothing bad to say about Stephen. They said that he was a little bit strange, but he was just a guy down on his luck who they was letting live with them rent-free so that he could be closer to his chemo treatments. So next, the detectives asked the Rynearsons did they own any firearms, and they said yes, but that Stephen would have never used it because they kept it in their car, but that the detectives were more than welcome to take their gun for testing. And so they did. The detectives took the Rynearson's gun and sent it off for ballistics testing. And while they waited for the ballistics tests to come back for the Rynearson's gun, they decided to look into Stephen a little bit more. And they found out that Stephen did not have cancer. Never had it, not even a little bit. Which, when they told the Rynearsons this, Robert Rynearson was flabbergasted, shocked, shook, and pissed because Stephen even had a colostomy bag. The Rynearsons had pretty much been bamboozled and swindled into letting Stephen stay there for free because they thought he was in need. And Stephen was playing them all along. So now that the detectives know that Stephen is an immaculate liar, they start to think of what would the motive be for Stephen to have committed this crime. And they realize that Robert and Heather had been written out of Marlene's will. And so if anything happened to her, so he wasn't getting a cut of nothing, no way. But if something happened to Marlene and Joe, their assets would be split between Michael and Stephen. But if something happened to Marlene, Joe, and Michael, Stephen would be the sole beneficiary of everything. And when the ballistics test came back from the Rynearson's gun, it would prove which of the brothers had committed this crime, because not only were the shell casings a match to the Rynearson's gun, but there was also blood found inside of the barrel, and the blood was matched to Michael Colegrove, meaning that the Rynearson's gun somehow had to have made its way to Laceyville, Pennsylvania, and get in contact with Michael's blood. And the only way that could have happened was through Stephen. So Robert and Heather, although they had this big feud with Michael and Marlene, they were not the ones who committed this crime. It was the youngest Colegrove, Stephen. So obviously they arrest and charge Stephen with the murders of his mom, Marlene, his dad, Joe, and his oldest brother, Michael. And he pled not guilty and ended up going to trial, but he was found guilty and he was sentenced to 3 life sentences. But proof of his guilt is not the only thing that came out in this trial. No, because for whatever reason, DNA testing was done, and it had turned out that Stephen was not even Joe's child. So Marlene had been sneaking and creeping and getting pregnant by other people and passed it off as Joe's. Or she had been sneaking and creeping and getting pregnant by other people, and Joe knew, and he just took on Stephen as his own child anyways. But once that little piece of information came out, stuff started making sense to the people in Laceyville, because Stephen had always been very different than his other 2 brothers. He looked different. He was way more athletic than the other 2. He had this very outgoing type of personality that the other two didn't have. And he was also the only son who Marlene and Joe didn't financially support once he got grown. And so people questioned if Joe knew that Stephen wasn't his son, and that's why he did not allow Marlene to continue helping him financially once he became of age. But whatever the case may be, the Colegrove family would face tragedy once again about 6 years after the murders occurred, because on May 20th, 2013, Robert Colegrove would lose his life in a fatal car accident while he was on his way home from work. And I really hate to end the video like this, but that is today's case. Thank you all so very much for watching. Don't forget to let me know what you guys think in the comments. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you all in the next one. Girl, you know what you look like. You need to pick your afro daddy, because it's flat on one side. That's what I feel like. Well, if you don't pick your afro. And the family consists of Dad Joe. No, yeah. And she's said to be a very and she's, oh my gosh. And for the most part, the Colegroves were, what were they, Janae? Everything was good. I mean, damn. Because they knew that Robert and Stephen would have shot in guns. Would have shot in guns?